All right, time for another update and forecast on the Thompson fire. Overall, I'd say it's looking much better than it was at this time yesterday. With the hot, dry conditions, we certainly have the potential for fire activity, but as you'll see on this map right here, a lot of the more recent activity has been kind of moderate compared to what we were seeing in previous days. So just kind of getting our bearings here. Here's Orville, here's Kelly Ridge. And then the color coding on this map that we have right here. So the yellow is going to be heat detections that are older than 24 hours. The orange is going to be 12 to 24 hours. And then normally you would see red, which would be the 0 to 12 hours, but you're not seeing very much red on this map. So right off the bat, that is good news. But even with some of the more recent fire activity, so 12 to 24 hours ago, so around yesterday afternoon, you notice that's more on the northern edge of the fire as you're coming up here. Let's see, around like Oregon City. It was starting to push up some of this topography yesterday, but it looks like they got a pretty good handle on it. I'll show the personnel numbers in a second, but they got a lot of people and equipment on this fire very quickly, and you can see why. Here's Orville down here, how close the fire pushed to some of those structures, and then one spot we were originally pretty worried about was Kelly Ridge. You could see it got fairly close, but keep in mind those yellow markers right there, again, are older than 24 hours ago, and you're not seeing any of the recent hot spots even in this area. Now, with that being said, we'll get into the weather forecast, but it is still very hot and dry today, and sometimes you can have smoldering that can pick back up, so that's something that I'm definitely going to be watching, but overall, the situation has definitely improved. But before we get into the forecast and looking for recent activity, should just go over some of the numbers. It is now up to 3,500 acres, 7% contained. Some people were commenting yesterday about how I don't talk about the cause of the fire ever, and that's just because it usually takes a while for them to do the investigation. I don't exactly know the details, but I'd imagine when a fire is happening, their first priority is getting people to safety, and then protecting structures, getting the fire out, and then I'd imagine the more of that investigation takes place. And that's a view right now. Not whenever there's smoke or a big plume coming off of the fire, that's usually what they show here. So the fact that all we're seeing is some haze is pretty good news right there. There's the personnel numbers I was talking about, though. It was, I think 2 days ago, they had 400 people on this fire, and then in no time at all, it jumped up over 1,500 personnel. Now it's up to almost 2,214 engines, 20 helicopters, 46 dozers. There are still some evacuation orders and warnings in place. So throughout this video, if we're looking at it and it doesn't seem like there's a lot of activity, keep in mind that you always have to stay updated with the most recent orders, which are in red, which means leave immediately, and yellow, which is a warning, which is kind of get ready to go. So the point I was trying to make there is, even if there's not a lot of activity right now, I'm recording this at like 9 in the morning, and fire activity does usually pick up in the afternoons. So yeah, stay updated. But right now it looks, and actually yesterday afternoon, the fire actually already started to die down. We'll look at some of those details in a second. But first, 4 structures destroyed, 4 injuries. I'm actually surprised to see that number is not larger, considering how close it was to such a large number of structures, and some of the photos coming out are pretty incredible. You can see that it was burning even in the overnight hours on the first day that this happened. But yeah, yesterday I was following Watch Duty very closely, and we started to see some improvements where a number of the evacuation orders were downgraded to warnings. That's always a really good sign. And then I also loved when I read this sentence right here. Air attack has released all air tankers from the fire. Multiple copters continue to work the incident. So if they're taking the air tankers off of the fire, that's usually a good sign. It does look like we still have that one helicopter right there. He's making some rounds, getting some water from Lake Orville, maybe dumping it on some of the hot spots there. So that's good to see. And then just a few seconds ago, Nick just did the morning update from CAL FIRE, so that'd be a good thing for us to read. Just to get the official report, firefighters continue to strengthen containment and control lines. Over the past 12 hours, there has been no change in the noted acreage. That kind of goes along with what we were seeing on our Google Earth map here, where we weren't seeing all that much red mostly just older hotspots. So not a whole lot of growth yesterday, which is great to hear. It was still hot and dry, but the winds just died down yesterday. But today we are expecting high temperatures, which increases the chances for fire growth, because hotter the air is, the more moisture it can hold. So as the air gets drier, dries out the fuels, and then it's just easier for fire to spread, because the fire doesn't have to waste its energy evaporating moisture out of the fuels. It can just catch them right away. And then firefighters on the line will continue to remain hydrated and ready in the event the fire activity increases. So I'm not going to go through all the different evacuation orders and warnings, because by the time most people are watching this, they'll have changed. So instead, let's just try to see if there's any current heat coming off of this fire. So with this, the fire perimeter is that kind of more precise yellow line. The yellow stars are some of the older heat detections, like what we're looking at on Google Earth. And then some of the red is the more recent fire activity. So right there, it does look like it's kind of the area closer towards Lake Orville where we had more of the recent activity. But look what happens if I go to all satellites. This would normally show big boxes where there's heat coming off of the fire right now. If you want to see what that looks like, you can watch my video from yesterday where we had some big red boxes on the northern edge of this fire. But right now, the satellites aren't showing any heat. And I looked at the satellite imagery. I'm not going to show it in this video, basically because it didn't show anything. It didn't look like there's any smoke coming off of the Thompson fire anymore. Now, one thing, not saying the fire's out though, so one thing we can look at, I think it was Dan Lowe commented this yesterday. He mentioned it could be important to look at some fire history in the area, and it maybe explains why this fire was able to grow as quickly as it did that first day, where it jumped from 0 to, what was it, I think maybe 3,000 acres in about one day. And it's because we don't have a lot of fire history in this area. That could be fuels that haven't burned in 50 years, and then you put a heat wave on top of that where the fuels are very dry, and yeah, that leads to some fast fire growth, especially when we had the windy conditions earlier in the week. But it's interesting that as the winds died down yesterday, the fire activity died down as well. There is some fire history though. So we have 2017, the Cherokee fire here. So even if the fire were to push up there, a lot of that fuel has been recently cleared out, which is good news. There is a lot of unburnt fuel right here, but again, and that was something we were worried about yesterday on the Google Earth imagery. You could see how much fuel was in this area. But, I mean, not seeing a lot of heat coming off of it right now. So I guess that more ties into the forecast of how much activity are we going to see this afternoon. Usually when it comes to fire weather, we're talking about three main aspects: temperature, wind, and humidity. You could throw in stability in there, but that gets a little into the weeds, so no pun intended. But just looking at temperature first, it's like this definitely checks the box for high fire danger, where it's 105 degrees today. Oh, also happy 4th of July to everybody out there. 109 degrees tomorrow, 110 degrees Saturday. So with that, there's definitely some heat concerns out there, even forgetting fire for just the moment. Anywhere where you see red or purple on this map is where we have major to extreme heat concerns. You know, some of those numbers you might say, oh, it's July, it's triple digits. Like, what do you expect? But usually we see heat like this for maybe 3 days. This heat really started Monday, and then it's going to last through Friday and Saturday. And heat impacts usually compound over time when your body just doesn't have time to recover. So that is something we're thinking about. And for any wildland firefighters out there, imagine that heat while wearing all that gear, while carrying 60 pounds on your back while doing manual labor. That's some pretty amazing work out there. The duration heat, now they're saying it goes through Tuesday, but it looks like the worst of the heat should be Friday and Saturday. And then here's the fire weather conditions out there. That's the thing that we like to see. So winds at times 5 miles per hour, close to nothing, gusts 10 to 15. So that's way down from where we were earlier this week when this fire was more active and we had some gusts over 20 to 30 miles per hour. So wind-wise, that's good news there. Daytime humidity is still quite dry. And another way to look at this, so I could zoom in here, we'll just focus on today first. It's this box on the left. top is your temperature, so that's going up into the triple digits. This lower one is your relative humidity in the low teens. In some pockets, it might even get into the single digits, so that's where it's incredibly dry out there. Winds, yeah, not that big of a factor though. And then overnight, look at the temperatures overnight. They only drop into the low 80s. So that's why the overnight relative humidity has been remaining exceptionally dry as well. The reason that's important is because it's usually overnight that the moisture goes back into your fuels and your fuels recover, so then they're not just primed to start or continue fire spread the next day. But when it does remain dry overnight, that does lead to just more fire activity overnight and throughout the day because, yeah, they didn't pick up any moisture. So one thing that I could show here, this is true for the Thompson fire, but actually everywhere in California today pretty much. That gray line is going to be your average. We're looking at energy release component. You could sort of think of that as how hot a fire might burn, how much energy is going to be released. It's a component mostly of how many fuels, how much fuel you have, and how dry the fuels are. So the gray is your average. The blue is going to be current, and then the red is your maximum. So if we zoom in way in here, you can see with this heat and the dry air we've had the last few days, our current is now above the maximum energy release component. So for this time of the year, that might be a new record for like how dry the fuels are, with the forecast actually expected to get drier. Keep in mind though that this is also July, where we have seen higher values in other parts of the year like August or September, but that's certainly a spike right there. And it does make me a little bit worried about the rest of fire season, because if we're already this dry and then things are just going to be getting drier through August and September, we may have a long ways to go. For example, I usually don't do my wildfire forecast videos till mid-August, but now I've started in mid-June, and then we've seen a lot of fire activity obviously this week. So especially thinking about fire danger with 4th of July, just showing this as months on the bottom, number of ignitions on the Y. Your black is the fires that are started by humans, and you see that huge spike due to all the fireworks, with taking into account the fact that our fuels are about record dry for 4th of July. Good idea to, be safe out there, also take some heat precautions, but also enjoy the holiday as well. So hopefully this video was helpful. I'll do another video this afternoon if there's any updates, like if the fire picks up in activity unexpectedly, but as of right now, I'd say we're looking pretty good on the Thompson fire, but always stay updated with the most recent information, CAL FIRE, and watch duty as well. So hopefully this video was helpful. Thanks for watching.